Greetings. Let's see John Keats' Ode to a Nightingale. In the early months of 1819, Keats was living with his friend Brown at Wentworth Place, Hampstead. The Wentworth Place we have seen in introduction of Keats, that is biography of Keats. Right? So let's see a brief overview of John Keats' biography as we have seen in the other video also. Just have a brief outline of John Keats. John Keats, 1795 to 1821, was born in England as the oldest of four surviving children, died of tuberculosis at the age of 25. His father fell off a horse and cracked his skull when Keats was 8. His mother died of tuberculosis when he was 14. Keats was put in the custody of his grandmother, who appointed two guardians for Keats. He was removed from school in 1810 to become a surgeon's apprentice, but chose to write instead of using his apothecary license. Right, let's see Keats' contemporaries. Keats became acquainted with Leigh Hunt, influential editor of the Examiner, who published O Solitude and on first looking into Chapman's Homer. Hunt then introduced Keats to Shelley and William Wordsworth. Influenced by these writers, Keats published a volume of poems that received negative reviews, with the exception of Shelley's opinion. Keats' declining health over the years is often attributed to his broken spirit after receiving so many unfavorable reviews of his poetry. So, the prescribed poem, Ode to a Nightingale. Let's see the poem. Right? First stanza. Keats, in his heartache, feels as though he has drunk poison, but declares that he does not envy the nightingale for being happy. In fact, he reveals in the fact that the birds sing so happily in the forest. So the poet's heart aches and his body is benumbed as he hears the song of a nightingale. He feels like one who has taken a benumbing poison or dulling drug. This effect is produced on him by the happy song of the nightingale, who is singing in a joyous, glorious voice among the green beech trees, and who is called by the poet a light-winged nymph of the trees. It is to be noted that the poet lapses away into a kind of swoon on hearing the ecstatic song of the nightingale, and he seeks oblivion. The following words in this stanza produce a cumulative effect of drugged languor, that is, aches, drowsy numbness, pains, dull, opiate, lithy was had sunk. So the very movement of the verse here contributes to the total effect of languor that is produced. Right? So it is an excess of happiness occasioned by the bird's song that produces the mood of languor in the poet. However, the narcotic effect is to some extent relieved by a feeling of renewed life that is produced by a reference to the light-winged dyad of trees, the melodious plot of beeches green and summer. Right? In the second stanza, Keats wishes for wine that tastes like dance and the country green so that he could use alcohol psychological effects on the mind to float away with the nightingale. The poet craves for a drink of some marvelous wine brewed in the warm, gay, and mirthful regions of France on a large cup of red wine fetched from the fountain of the Muses. So he wants this wine to enable him to leave this world of reality and to escape into the forest where he can join the nightingale. The nightingale and its songs have given way in this stanza to other thoughts of wine, the colorful lands in which its grapes are grown, and the gaiety which it brings. A general atmosphere of warmth predominates in this stanza. Right? Sunburnt myth combines the idea of the sun's warmth with the warmth of joy in the merrymakers. This is a richly sensuous stanza with its references to gaiety and mercy and merrymaking, the cool wine, the dancing, the blushful wine, and its bubbles winking at the brim. So the poet's desire for wine does not mean a desire for warmth and gaiety, right? So it is a desire for escape from the world of reality. So here he mentions that he wants to mingle with the nightingale. He wants to, enjoy the warmth of gaiety. It doesn't mean that he wants to enjoy the desire of warmth, desire of wine. He just wants to escape from the blunt reality. That is what here he mentions. The third stanza. Keats lists things that the nightingale has never known, such as palsy, and solemnly admits that in the human world, youth, beauty, and love don't last forever. The poet wishes to forget himself and escape from this world of perplexity and sorrow into the forest to be in the company of the nightingale. Life, he says, offers a depressing spectacle with its weariness, fever, and fret. So, this is a world in which people hear each other's groans, a world in which palsy may attack the old and consumption may attack the young, in which merrily to think is to become sad, and which both beauty and love are short lived. So, here we have some of the most pessimistic lines in English poetry. Of course, the picture of life depicted here is one sided, but it is nonetheless realistic and convincing. It cannot be doubted that the amount of suffering in this world is far greater than the amount of happiness. Apart from that, these lines echo the past and personal grief caused by the premature death of his brother Tom. So, although these lines are prompted chiefly by personal grief, yet their universal character has to be recognized. Right? The nightingale is believed by the poet to be happy because it is not human, because it has never known the weariness, the fever, and fret of human existence. And the poet knows too well that the happiness in mentally following the bird into its world among the leaves cannot last. For he is a human being after all, and what is human must pass away. His depression is thus implicit in the happiness itself. In the fourth stanza, Keats decides that he will not use wine to float away with the bird. Though the dull brain purposes, he tells the bird to fly away so that he can follow it on the wings of poetry. So, dismissing the idea of wine, the poet decides to fly into the forest on the wings of his poetic imagination. Right? He rejects Bacchus and seeks the help of poesy. The next moment, he feels transported into the forest. The moon is shining, surrounded by the stars. But the forest is dark because very little light can penetrate the thickly growing leaves of trees. After having given expression to thoughts of human sorrow in the third stanza, the poet here makes a vigorous effort to get back into a happy mood. Gloomy thoughts about the human lot are now brushed aside, together with the possibility of wine. Seeking refuge in poetic fantasy, he draws pleasure from the glory of nature. However, the picture of nature in the second half of the stanza has been criticized as being affected because of the reference to the queen moon, right? And the idea of the stars as fairies. Keats is being self consciously poetical in the bad sense, as though he had gone back to the pretty manner of Endymion. It is not accidental that he has used the rather mated word poesy here. The lines are exceedingly charming, and when we have said that, we have made a point against them. This kind of charm is not what we have come to accept from the mature Keats. That is what commented by Robin Mayhew. So in the fifth stanza, Keats writes that although he can't see the different flowers, he can use each flower's scent to label them in the embalmed darkness. The poet cannot see what flowers grow at his feet in the forest and what blossoms are on the fruit trees. However, by the scents that fill the dark air, he can guess that the forest is a rill of white hawthorns, sweet berries, violets, and buds of musk roses, which will in due course attract multitudes of flies on summer evenings. This is again a richly sensuous stanza. The poet makes a delighted response to the sensuous beauty of the world of nature. In the sixth stanza, he says Keats has been half in love with the idea of dying. The Nightingale's song would make dying then and there easier, but his ears would then only be able to hear the bird's song in vain. As he hears the Nightingale's song in the darkness, he remembers how, on many occasions in his life, he has wished for death that would bring a release from the burden of existence. More than ever before, he now feels the desire to die, though he would like to die a painless death to seize upon the midnight with no pain. The nightingale will continue to pour forth its ecstatic melody even when he is dead and become completely deaf to it. The mood of the poet has again changed. He started the poem in a mood of ecstasy, which changed into a mood of extreme sorrow in the third stanza. The fourth and fifth stanzas, he changed back into a joyous mood. Now he expresses a wish to die in the stanza. He is therefore in a most morbid mood. The desire for death is obviously an unhealthy one, and though the reader may have been sharing the preceding moods of the poet, he may not be able to share this desire for death. Seventh stanza. Keats comments on the bird's immortality, saying it sang for emperors. In ancient days, he also writes that the bird's song could open magic casements. The poet now contrasts the mortality of human beings with the immortality of the nightingale. The nightingale's song, he argues, has not changed for centuries. The voice of the nightingale, the voice of the nightingale, which he now hears, is perhaps the same as was heard in ancient times by emperor and clown, the same as was heard by the miserable Ruth as she stood in the alien corn. It is the same voice which has often cast a spell upon the enchanted windows of a castle situated on the shore of a dangerous ocean in fairy lands forlorn. There is something illogical about the poet's attributing immortality to the nightingale, but of course, he is referring to the continuity of the bird's song, which has remained unchanged through the centuries. He certainly does not mean that the bird is literally immortal. He only takes the nightingale's song as a symbol of permanence. Generations pass, yet the song of the nightingale continues from age to age. In the Ode on Melancholy, Keats accepts impermanence as inevitable, but here he dwells upon the idea of permanence. The last two lines of the stanza have become famous for the same and the sense of wonder and mystery which they arouse. It is said that in these two lines, Keats has touched the high watermark of romanticism. Right? In stanza 8, Keats howls his adoration of the nightingale to concentrate on himself. He is saddened by the bird's flight elsewhere and by his seeming lack of imagination. So the word forlorn acts on the poet's mind like the ringing of an alarm bell and reminds him of his own forlorn condition. As the song of the nightingale becomes more distant, his imagination, which had carried him into the forest, also declined, and the poetic vision fades. He knows that he is moving back from the region of poetic fancy to the common world of reality. After all, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do. So, in the concluding stanza, the stanza 8, the poet introduces two new ideas. One is that even the song of the nightingale cannot be heard constantly and that it must fade away before long. Secondly, the poetic imagination itself has only brief flights, and that at the end of a poetic flight to a beautiful region, one must return to the painful realities of life. Thus, the ode, which had opened on a note of ecstasy, ends on a note of frustration. Right? So, the ode to a nightingale is a regular ode. So you can see here the literary devices, the river Lethe, Greek and Roman mythology, underworld's river of forgetfulness, Flora, a Roman goddess of flowers, Hippocrene, muses fountain, Bacchus and his leopards, Roman god of wine, Ruth, widow who left her people for a new land. So fade forever and quite forget the fever and the fret. So these are the lines which we have seen here, the literary devices which I have mentioned in the previous slide. So death called him soft names, fancy cannot cheat so well, youth grows pale, beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, and love pine at them. So these are the things which we have mentioned, right? So an ode is a complex, long lyric poem on a serious subject, intimate, meditative, not a story, but emotions and thoughts. Keats' use of slant rhyme, bean and green. Ode to a Nightingale is an example of quintessential romanticism. So all 8 stanzas have 10 pentameter lines and a uniform rhyme scheme, right? That is why it is called a regular ode. The poem is regular in form. It leaves the impression of being a kind of a rhapsody. Keats is allowing his thoughts and emotions free expression. One thought suggests another, and in this way, the poem proceeds to a somewhat arbitrary conclusion. Right? The poem impresses the reader as being the result of free inspiration, uncontrolled by a preconceived plan. The poem is Keats in the act of sharing with the reader an experience he is having rather than recalling an experience. The poetic, the definition of poem, according to Wordsworth, recollection of thoughts. The experience is not entirely coherent. It is what happens in his mind while he is listening to the song of a nightingale. Right? So Keats' assignment of immortality to the nightingale in stanza 7 has caused readers much trouble. Keats perhaps was thinking of a literal nightingale more likely. However, he was thinking of the nightingale as a symbol of poetry which has a permanence. So Keats' evocative power is shown especially in stanza 2, where he associates a beaker of wine with beaded bubbles winking at the brim, with sunny France and the sunburnt mirth of his harvesters. And then his picture in stanza 7 of Ruth, suffering from homesickness amid the alien corn. The whole ode is a triumph of tonal richness of that verbal music that is Keats' special contribution to the many voices of poetry. Right? So you can see the work cited for your reference. You can use it. And this is what there are 3 main ideas here in this poem. We could see the first one, right? Evaluation of life. Life is a veil of tears and frustration. And the second is Keats wished that he might die and be rid of life altogether. And the third main thought in the ode is the power of imagination or fancy. That fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do. He admits in the concluding stanza the imagination, not all the powerful function Keats at the times thought it was. It cannot give more than a temporary escape from the cares of life. Thank you.